Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As you know, our topic is analytic support to deterrence planning, roughly speaking. And let me just set a little bit of context first. The call from national leadership for new and better thinking about deterrence has been clear and consistent for many years now. Let me just give you a few highlights. Beginning in 2015, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter called for, quote, a new playbook for deterring Russia. And that same year, Secretary of Energy Moniz wrote, we must challenge our thinking in order to permit far-sighted actions that may reduce the chance for surprise and that buttress deterrence. In 2017, the National Security Strategy argued that, quote, the United States must develop new concepts to protect our homeland and preserve peace. In 2018, the National Defense Strategy lamented the, quote, strategic atrophy of recent decades and called for a high-level effort to, quote, outthink, outmaneuver, outpartner, and out-innovate adversaries. And as recently as, and then came the 2018 National Defense Strategy Commission that strongly criticized the absence of such strategic thought, arguing that it may well contribute to strategic failure in crisis and war. And the commission went on to call for action to remedy the situation on an urgent basis. And as recently as last month, this U.S. strategic commander called for an effort to, quote, grow the intellectual capital to forge 21st century strategic deterrence. The call has been clear and consistent, indicating a continuing lag in performance in this area. In September of 2018, the Defense Department leadership turned to its advisory board on weapons of mass destruction, the Threat Reduction Advisory Committee, for advice on how to improve deterrence analysis and planning. The TRAC, as it's known, convened a task force, and with us today are two of its co-chairs to discuss with us the results of their work. Bill Chambers is a member of the research staff at the Institute for Defense Analyses. IDA will be known to many of you. For those who don't know it, it's a federally funded research and development center providing analytical support to the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He leads research teams focused on nuclear weapons policy and strategy. Bill joined IDA in 2013 following his retirement at the rank of Major General after 35 years of service in the Air Force. I had the pleasure of frequent collaboration with Bill while he served in the Air Force headquarters as Assistant Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Integration, essentially as the service's senior nuclear officer. Ron Lehman is, of course, well known to the laboratory community. He's a counselor to the laboratory director, and he's also a longtime director of CGSR. He joined the laboratory in 1994 following a distinguished career of public service in both the legislative and executive branches of government, culminating in service as director of the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. And he has served and continues to serve in multiple advisory roles to the Departments of Energy, State, and Defense. So let me review briefly the ground rules for our session today. These remarks are on the record and will be posted online. But our recording of the session will cease as we transition to the Q&A portion. If you'd like to join the conversation as we go to Q&A, please raise your hand electronically. I will then call on you and you will be unmuted. Or you may send a chat message, a message to me or to, quote, all panelists, and I'll make sure to read it out for our two speakers. So without further ado, thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us today. I think, Ron, you're going to get us started. Over to you.
All righty. Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Katie, for setting this all up. You've got a fantastic team there at CGSR, and you've really pulled together a great audience. One administrative note, General Chambers has to break on the hour for an urgent meeting. I know it's a very analytical audience, but don't overinterpret what it means when Bill suddenly gets up and walks out. I can stay for more questions after Bill has to leave. But if you have a question that you really want to get to Bill, try to present it earlier. Bill and I are pleased to join with you all for this discussion of the track nuclear report that was completed last November. Its title is a bit of a mouthful. We were given the title Scenario-Based Planning to Maintain the Credibility of the U.S. Nuclear Deterrent Against Emerging Threats. Katie, could you jump to slide 3? As required by the Federal Advisory Committees Act, this track report has to be a consensus document, not only of the full membership of the track, but also of the additional members that we added for the task force. As a result, it has some of the characteristics of anything written by committee. And also, it's important to remember that to avoid conflicts of interest, we sometimes had to avoid in the report certain specificity that might be perceived as favoring or not favoring a particular product or providers. Also, the report's been officially cleared for release by the Defense Department, but a reminder that no FACA report represents official positions or policies of the U.S. government. They're advisory. Likewise, any views Bill and I express beyond direct quotation of the text should be considered our own views and not necessarily those of the track or the track members or any organizations with which we are or have been associated. Bill and I are going to try to be brief so there will be more room for question and answers. We presented an earlier version of this to Stratcom and to Stratcom's Academic Alliance. So we would like to push beyond that as much as possible. They posted the full report and the PowerPoint on their website. Bill's going to begin by discussing what the track was asked to do, the context, and what we think we found. Then I'm going to give some more specific examples of the challenges that emerge both from the conduct of nuclear war games and also from some of the efforts to identify the best measures of merit when looking at deterrence. Then Bill will conclude by presenting the track recommendations, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So, Bill, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Brad, Katie, and the team at CGSR. It was an honor to serve on this panel with Ambassador Lehman, and we were joined by some tremendous minds on this subject, and it was quite invigorating to strap this on. As Ron indicated, the name of our task force was a mouthful, and our terms of reference was verbose. It was lengthy, and it described basically what Undersecretary Lord, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, was most concerned about. That is, how should we be thinking about and planning for a credible deterrent capability during the next 10 to 25 years? And what analytic tools might we use or have at our disposal to get after that thinking that Brad so eloquently described as such an imperative by the department for the last 5 to 10 years. So the tasking on slide 4, and I think Katie's got that up, evaluate available methodologies, consider analytic and data-driven frameworks, identify options. In my work and in your work at Livermore, obviously, you're well aware of the decisions that the department faces, both departments face, with regard to modernization of the triad. Decision makers in the Pentagon and in DOE are very focused on wanting not just the best military advice or the best Department of Energy advice. They're very focused on what data and analytics can inform the decisions they need to make. So how do we think about it and what tools are available? Slide 5. The context of our tasking is important. First of all, this is an enormous 25-year challenge that the department faces. And the Undersecretary and her deputy asked us, help us understand what we don't know or what it is we need to know. The strategic setting is complex. The program of record for the simultaneous modernization of every leg of the triad and all of its warheads is complicated. And between now and when it's fielded, our adversaries are thinking, acting, and developing and enhancing new technologies. In a word, this problem is shrouded in complexity at many levels. The number of actors, the variety of advanced capabilities and technologies, and the combinations of bad days that might take place. What if a current legacy delivery platform, for instance, or warhead experiences a premature retirement? What if one of the legs of the triad and its program of record is delayed? What if new threats are on the horizon that threaten current delivery systems? So the task force was, and if you've read the report, you'll see it, but we boiled it down to 3 central challenges. Over the next 2 to 3 decades, successive presidents have got to sustain consensus in the legislative branch for a modernization, an epic modernization of the triad. Any delay, any bad day, even either a premature retirement or a delayed fielding of a new system is going to produce a gap, and that gap might be made worse by an evolving threat. So tools are needed, analytic tools are needed, and tools are available. Slide 6. During our work on the task force, we were also informed by a couple of sessions while we were in progress with Undersecretary Lord and her direct reports. And she and her staff, in addition to the written terms of reference, asked us for some specific things, some go-dos that they should be focused on. She also asked for a story, a narrative, if you will, for how to discuss this challenge, how to discuss the complexity that surrounds 21st century deterrence, not only for educating people who are not immersed in this day to day, but also from a perspective of advocacy and persuasion. And so, as an expansion of the central part of our report, and included as Appendix A or Annex A, there is a primer on the issues surrounding how we should be thinking about nuclear deterrence. I think it's a very good document that could be used by any part of DoD or DOE leadership to help inform how we talk about this problem. Okay, so that's the tasking, that's the context we went about our business, and slide 7 summarizes our findings. First of all, the current tool set, the current analytic tool set, and when I say that, we included modeling, simulation, and wargaming. That tool set is insufficient. The focus of most existing tools is narrow. There are not enough modeling, simulation, and wargaming tools at work to tackle this problem, and there is too little data. So expanding use of analytic tools is needed as a first step. And wargaming is the best example. The number of war games that actually deal with nuclear decision-making and nuclear use in an ongoing conflict with an adversary, bottom line is the sample size is too small. There are too few. The games that do exist are large, cumbersome. The lessons and insights from those games are not plowed back into policymaking and decision advice. And there are existing tools in industry and available that can help expand this use of analytic tools. Number 3 on this slide is the finding regarding urgency. We have a decade between now and when the first system fields, basically, to get our arms around this with analytic rigor. And if we don't do it now, if we don't do it soon, we won't be ready for these all-important transition years when we transition from the legacy triad to the modern triad. And as you see on this slide, we believe a particular emphasis is required to examine that FY29 to FY39 period. Slide 8, some further findings. As we mentioned, this is a complex problem. When you put together great power competition as outlined in the National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, when you consider the expanded capabilities of our adversaries, when you consider their new thinking, their new doctrine, their new theories of victory, and when you consider the fact that the salience of nuclear use might be on the rise, and the uncertainties that surround these factors, the number of scenarios in which we explore this, particularly with wargaming, needs to increase. However, starting with China and Russia is the right place to start. There are scenarios involving those adversaries that we should start with first. Knowing them as we do, and our report, by the way, emphasizes the fact that the intelligence community needs to do better at knowing these adversaries, but knowing them as we do today, there are plausible and challenging scenarios we need to wrestle. So it requires a better understanding of the adversary. It requires a better understanding of how they form their perceptions, how they make their decision making, how they make their decisions, and who's involved in their decision making. The ability to increase the sample size of wrestling with these scenarios is made very, very clear in our report. You can't tackle all the scenarios, but there are a few that should be that we should start with, and start there to increase the sample size of what is likely regional conflicts that start in other domains and broach nuclear use by the adversary. Although our report does say a lot about wargaming, it's not all about wargaming. It includes modeling and simulations as well. And we know, and we discussed and explored what modeling and simulation and wargaming tools are currently in use. And thus, our principal finding is what we're using right now is insufficient. We've got to expand the use of these tools, and there are plausible scenarios we should start with. At this point, I'll turn it over to Ron to specifically discuss some challenges to wargaming.
Thanks, Bill. I'd like to expand on some of the specifics and the findings and tie the problem to the issue of deterrence metrics. Could we go to slide 9? Let me give you my bottom line up front, sort of a bumper sticker. Most wargaming is heuristic but it would benefit from becoming more stochastic. What's that all mean? Well, heuristic is about learning, especially by doing, and stochastic is about having enough data to do statistically meaningful probabilistic studies. Doing the both at the same time has always been difficult. While there are enduring fundamentals, both the soft sciences and the hard sciences related to deterrence have been advancing, and yet we've not found it easy to exploit those advances. But there may be some solutions that, if we take advantage of these new tools and we can integrate them using advances in data science and perhaps high performance computing in some cases. Traditional wargaming actually has an impressive history, long predating the nuclear era. I would argue even advanced abstract board games like chess and Go and the old game of diplomacy actually help train strategic thinking. And if you've watched them, you can even see that it exposes players to some of the emotional stress and interpersonal dynamics involved in making decisions. Some years ago, commercial military board games became very sophisticated, and you can find their digital versions online today. During the last 2 centuries, wargaming proved particularly helpful in studies of troop movements and also, by the way, logistics. Today, wargaming has evolved to exploit modeling, simulations, systems analysis, and even field exercises. In the next phase, it will exploit higher performance computing, big data, high fidelity virtual reality, machine learning, neural networks, and artificial intelligence, and advanced analysis such as those dealing with, complex adaptive systems and other aspects of so-called emergent behavior. There are many different approaches to emergent behavior, but to put it simply, it's when the inputs result in outputs that seem counterintuitive. If you take chlorine, which is a poison gas, and put it together with sodium, which reacts violently with water, you get sodium chloride, which is table salt, which behaves very differently from its components. Emergent behavior is a very interesting issue of analysis that's relevant. The Defense Department conducts important and valuable military exercises and war games every year. A number of well-established and useful tools exist to support these efforts. Unfortunately, these command posts and field exercises can be very expensive and time-consuming to prepare. As a result, they assess only a few scenarios, and those scenarios may constitute only a small number of the credible options. Also, the learning experience, however constrained, that is provided for those who actually participated in the game is often not easy to pass on to those who are not directly involved. Indeed, the particular lessons learned themselves are often inadequate to apply more generally. Sampling how one person made a decision in a single case often falls short of understanding what that same person might do in a slightly different case. And it might tell us even less about what a different person might decide. Indeed, when the results are heavily idiosyncratic to individual players, evaluating alternative doctrine, strategies, forces, and weapon systems can be overwhelmed by what sometimes appears to be almost random human decisions. Indeed, fear of disclosure of actual decisions may introduce artifacts into nuclear war games that would not be reflected in the real world. All of this that applies more generally to war games is even more exaggerated when it's nuclear war games. Nuclear war games, when they are played, frequently remind us of the Japanese theater form known as kabuki. Intense posturing and verbalization, but little movement. Too often in the past, nuclear wargaming ends the moment of nuclear first use. Issues of escalation management, de-escalation, damage limitation, avoiding the fait accompli, war termination, and the reestablishment of deterrence are seldom gamed across the full spectrum of conflict. Yet all of this can change because of emerging technology, and it must change because the geostrategic world we live in is being transformed. Given the growth in numbers of nuclear weapon-armed states in different troubled regions, and the diversity of geography, forces, interests, weapons, cultures, and psychologies, we have more scenarios to consider. And we need to consider them more analytically and deeply, especially in the multi-domain, multiplayer context. We need more data and more high-fidelity data for evidence-based decision-making. DoD has increasingly looked to networks and federations of analytical capabilities to overcome the problems of big data and complexity. I might say, as we move from sort of generalized plaster of Paris terrain boards with cardboard military units to the use of holographic 3D depictions of detailed military assets digitally overlaid on actual locations with real-time weather conditions and more realistic weapons effects, our opportunities to exploit gaming grows. These technologies can be used to train commanders, evaluate personnel and units, compare strategy and tactics, plan real military operations, and even assess existing weapon systems or systems being considered for acquisition. The results can even be used to prioritize acquisition and optimize procurements and logistics. Thus, new technologies may make possible the cost-effective production of statistically significant information that can be validated against meaningful metrics to enable evidence-based decision-making. Katie, could you jump to slide 10? Thanks. The selection of metrics itself, however, is a major challenge. Annex A of the report highlights a number of potential measures of merit, both quantitative and qualitative. Most reflect the value of diverse capabilities. Yet the track report highlights several very important ideas that I suspect may encourage a wider application of the precautionary principle. First, the report notes that, and I quote, "A single composite measure of merit for deterrence is unlikely to be reliable. Analysis of multiple measures of merit is necessary to account for the diverse views of the U.S., its allies, and its adversaries." Second, the track report warns against what quants call surrogation. This is the confusion of the metric with what it's supposed to measure. Numbers of weapons and megatons and alert rates are all part of deterrence, but none of these is the essence of deterrence itself, or for that matter, of assurance either. Third, the report stresses the importance of understanding the impact of surprise and using wargaming to prepare for what you don't expect or what you think is unlikely. Fourth, the report reminds us that we do wargaming not only to understand ourselves, but also to understand our potential adversaries, whose thinking we must be careful not simply to mirror image or at the other extreme to stereotype. And this leads me to what I personally believe is one of the most important insights in the track report, namely that if we don't develop advanced nuclear wargaming to better understand our adversaries, we may face an even worse situation when adversaries use advanced wargaming to go to school on us and our allies and our strategies and our forces. So, Bill, back to you on the recommendations.
Thanks, Ron. Slide 11, Katie, thanks. In a slide here is the summary of what we said. The report goes into considerable length. Bottom line is the department needs to create a roadmap. Why? Because there are all sorts of modeling, simulation, and gaming efforts going on across the department by the services, by the combatant commanders, by labs, by FFRDCs, by defense agencies, and they're not knit together. but a roadmap would provide guidance and synchronization to all of these efforts. First of all, not every tool that's out there is applicable. There are, for instance, hundreds of data analytic outfits out there. Many of them in Northern California, and they're not all useful for this challenge. Integrating the right set of tools together to generate the right scenarios and the right amount of high quality data is needed at the strategic level to help department leaders make the decisions necessary regarding the modernization of the triad, regarding the posture of the triad, regarding the proper balance of the triad and its attributes. Such a roadmap would not only help us find the right tools tailored for this challenge, but it also might make this pursuit a little more cost effective than everyone just latching on to the next new analytic technology. Secondly, these tools cannot be applied to scenarios that have a bright, bold line between conventional and nuclear. Analytic tools that we're speaking of, that we're recommending, need to be able to handle a conflict begins in other domains and crosses the nuclear threshold, and include advanced technologies in space, in cyber, and across the spectrum of conflict in every phase. Lastly, such a roadmap is needed to cut across organizational and functional boundaries, break down stovepipes where many of these tools are currently being explored. Lastly, let me just close with a couple of cautions and warnings. First of all, these analytic tools need to be applied to a number of what-if scenarios. Our report goes into this in considerable length. It needs, first of all, to go beyond just the triad. It needs to be able to test decision-making, which will be, along with the scenarios, much more complex. So what-if scenarios need to include things like, what if we lost a leg of the triad? What if we lost a key attribute? What if we lost an ally? What if we surrendered our technological edge in a particular domain? What if we had a different sort of opponent with a different set of values who determine stakes very differently than we do? What if we face a considerable budget challenge? What about threats in space and cyber that our adversaries are pursuing aggressively? Lastly, such a roadmap for a nicely knit together set of modeling, simulation, and wargaming tools needs to not be done with an aggressive pursuit of analytic technologies themselves. What I mean is that asking the right questions is more important than the tools to generate the answers. So the development of this roadmap has to be done by people who understand the complexity of this challenge, who understand deterrence in this century, alongside people who understand the analytic technologies required in modeling, simulation, and gaming. With that, I will close and open it up to questions and answers.
Thanks, gents, for an excellent overview of the subject and report.